Okay, another attempt to try and get a break from this insanity for a bit. Just watched a well-intentioned video about Star Trek and the history of it, but still a few too many myths creeping in to the story here. Let's especially some apparently misread something rather seriously wrong. There's one video I saw. I'm not going to specify because I don't want anybody pigpiling on the guy, but somehow got into the head that that Desilu was also involved with Lost in Space. No, 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 no. That was 20th Century Fox. That was Errol and Allen. The crossover with Star Trek Lost in Space was that they had the bright idea. It was Oscar Katz at Desilu, the higher up than Herb Solo, but he was the rig guy. He had the bright idea to try and pitch directly to CBS, and brought Gene along because again Desilu had an in with CBS time because I Love Lucy made a large role in building CBS to be as big as it was, and they had like first look deal, anything coming from Desilu, and so they figured, okay, yeah, just hit the thing going, and unfortunately, kind of walked in the thing because CBS was developing Lost in Space, part of the thing, with Orlando Allen and Fox, and they basically used Gene as a sounding board. Unknowingly, Gene, they're asking questions of how would you do this, thinking, oh, they're interested, and of course he's telling them how you do certain things and how you could work around little things, because Gene was a fairly gifted producer, as in getting production problems solved in inventive ways. And unfortunately, he kind of laid out the blueprint of how they could make Lost in Space. And so, he thought, well, that's okay, but we've already got another show we're working on. It's like, you bastards. And then that's when Herb said, Oscar, let me handle this from now on. Don't, and then they did the pitch for the NBC. Because Herb was an NBC guy. He was an exec there for a while before he went to Desilu and became, and he was kind of their inside guy to try and get business away from Lucy, away from CBS. And then, the whole thing, Herb did all the talking. Gene just sat there and looked pretty, pretty much. And they made the deal with for Star Trek with Desilu, based on their affection for Herb Solo. They did not like Gene Roddenberry because he had made them look like fools on during the Lieutenant, with the whole thing with the episode to set it right, and made them look like they weren't committed to civil rights as they said they were, because they didn't want to run the episode, and they were forced to run the episode, and they got praise from the NAACP and stuff, but they also lost the cooperation of the Pentagon, so it was actually a fairly well regarded series at the time, but they cut it off at one season. We're not dealing with them anymore. So it was a lot of promising, we'll keep Gene under control, okay, and this will be a pricey show, and it was one of the most expensive shows on television at the time. Not the most expensive, but up there. And the problem is it wasn't bringing in the ratings to justify the cost. It wasn't low rate. It did win the night many times throughout its run, or at least was very competitive. And again, they only got 3 networks, but it did very well for its time. But the thing is, it wasn't doing well enough overall to justify the equivalent of $1 million an episode in 1966-67. And so it was always, we're not getting the payback we need for the money we're getting out. It wasn't low rated per se, but it was not the big boffo hit that needed to justify the expense. But but again, there were only 3 seasons. Of all the new shows that came out in 1966, Star Trek's the only one that made it 3 seasons. Every other new show from 66 pretty much blew away and died by that point, so Star Trek was the only real bona fide hit from the 67 season. But a lot, they were doing, and the big bone of controversy is the Friday night death slot. That started really in the making of Star Trek. The thing that they were worried, because the show was the book was written in the hiatus between 2nd and 3rd season. That's why the episode only goes up to the 3rd season. And they'd found out by then that they were going to Friday nights at 10. But if you look at all the schedule at the time, there's really no other place you could have put Star Trek and hope to be competitive. Because if they had gotten that Monday night at 7 or 6, slot that Roddenberry wanted, they'd have been going up against the Avengers on ABC and Gunsmoke on CBS. And if they had jumped with it, a lot of things were they're starting these hour long shows in the half hour to some bizarre theory. It would have been, yeah, the second half of Gunsmoke and Lucy's new show. So that would have been a nice bit of irony. So no, and the thing, and it wasn't necessarily, the Hell Death slot is not necessarily a show because The Man from Uncle was in that very same slot a few years earlier, and it appealed to the very same demographic as Star Trek, and it did very well. In fact, it was floundering at the time. They put it at Friday Nights at 10, and it became a success. It hit the top 10. So I think there's a thing of hoping maybe we can do the same thing with Star Trek here. Stick it in there, and it might, find an audience because they knew it appealed to mostly kids. And while you're out there, well, the kids were out, they're out on date night, and it's like, well, one, a lot of them did actually rearrange their schedules thanks to watch Star Trek, but also younger kids who aren't dating. Friday night is not a school night. They can stay up late and watch the show. I was 4 or 5 years. I wonder why I didn't. I don't know, because I could have. I'm not sure what I was watching at that time, but again, I was also 4 or 5 years old. I probably would pass my bed. Look, if I could stay awake that long, I'll look into that because I'm not sure if I was watching anything late night to Friday. Not that early. But I think there was a hope that they were trying to. They gave the show 3 seasons. They could have cut them off at 13 weeks, but they did give it a shot. So NBC does get a little more crap than they deserve. But but also a few little things that some of it didn't come out until later years. But the syndication package, everyone figured the third season is when Paramount definitely took over about halfway through the second season. That's when they started changing the keys over, and it's no longer Desilu Productions, now Paramount Television at the end of it, and they started taking over, and the Gulf Western people, because they owned, it wasn't the Paramount bought Desilu, Gulf Western bought Paramount and Desilu and smashed them together, and that fence that separated the two between just tore it down, and now they're all one big happy Paramount Studios. And the thing is, Gulf Western was primarily known for, sugar and that kind of thing. And you got people coming in there who don't really know how to run a movie studio. Now, Paramount was a little more experienced in dealing with idiots like this, and they suffered the least. They were able to put it off and explain why they take 13 takes for to get one shot in. Desilu wasn't. Desilu was still pretty, for a long time, it was run like I think Jimmy Comack talking about, like when you're a struggling comedian working the Catskills and you're sitting around with your buddies, daydreaming what it's going to be like when we, we can own our own studio, make our own stuff. That's kind of what Desilu was run like for a while. It was, like Lucy and Desi, running their own studio and the writers had the free reign of the place. They could wander around, and in a very open, creative place. You could do something weird like, oh, thank you, Parrot Head. See? The function does work, kids. But, that's the way they were running Desilu for a while. Then Gulf Western comes in, and they want to run it like a business. And a business doesn't do that sort of thing. So suddenly the writers don't have the free reign of the studio. But Bejo Trimble could be able to come in and do stuff, and suddenly she's not getting any material from Fred Freiberg or anything, anything. That's why the original fan version of the Concordance, it covers the first 2 seasons. We don't get a supplement for the 3rd season until 72, when the show's already been and done. You couldn't get the time of day from Fred Freiberger, because he did not get the whole thing of maintaining relations with the fans. And Gene, unfortunately, had already pretty much disengaged, and it was like, well, that's it. It's going off the air now. They're put on the death slot. And the quality did start slipping. And that's when the ratings really did start slipping badly for the show. Because especially it's like when you open up the season with Spock's brain, because somebody has it's a proper sci-fi story. It's like, yeah, the writing was on the wall at that point, and they bring in the producer and Freiberger and his crew that really didn't. Oh yeah, it is a weird history. At the end, it's show business. It's no more convoluted than anybody else. any other show, but it's weird. Lucy, and also Lucy gets a little too much praise. They got, she trusted Herb Solo to bring in, because that was his edict, bring us innovative shows that nobody else is doing that we can possibly make a hit out of, And he brought in Mission Impossible, Star Trek. I think he probably brought in Mannix and other stuff. Because beforehand, it was like the only shows they were doing that were theirs was pretty much, whatever Lucy was doing at the time. The rest of the time, they're renting out studio space to other productions, other studios. So that the whole point was to getting their own stuff made. And Star Trek was going to be one of the, and it was a groundbreaking show. It was a big one, Big budget science fiction show for adults, And one of the things was like no smart aleck robots or wise ass kids, or goofy alien. No, this is going to be a grown up adult, serious science fiction show, and we're going to bring in established science fiction writers to write things, and that was a bit of an issue because not all of them were experienced in writing TV, so there was a little bit of riding herd on some of these guys, But think about halfway through, but the second season you started getting a little better thing, and some of the writers that did come back, they'd been through the mill with Roddenberry the first year, and Gene Coon had a better idea of how to manage writers, so it smoothed out a bit. But again, third season, Gene Coon was gone for a lot of personal reasons. I'm not going to go into that. They're going into Bob Justman and Herb Solo's book Inside Star Trek. They go into that a lot. And John Meredith Lucas, who took over the second half of the second bit of the second season, didn't want to come back for a third season. They should have, in my personal opinion, they should have given Bob Justman the kick up, but for some reason, it didn't occur to them because Justman had been there since the time of the second pilot, and he knew the show and he had some pretty good ideas. Originally, I was talking that if they got the early slot, then Roddenberry would come back and line produce the show himself, but. He felt he had to stick by his word. So when they got Friday, he felt he kind of was honor bound to stick by his word and say, "Okay, I'm not producing the show." And he stepped back as executive producer, and they brought in Freiberger, and the rest is history. I think if they had given them, they made Justman co-producer. If they had given Bob Justman, just make him the line producer, and you had Dorothy Fontana on there, you could have maintained the quality if nothing else. But also, if they'd stuck at Monday nights at 9, they wouldn't have lasted halfway through their Thursdays. That was a kamikaze slot. So no, Friday nights at maybe not at 10, but Friday nights was probably the only thing open to them really, and still be a viable chance of getting anywhere. But it went along, and the thing also when Gulf Western took over and became part of Paramount. They had already signed the syndication deal with Kaiser and other for the match, so they already knew they're going to make their money up. So the third season they put up with a largely to fill out the numbers, to make this because show. There's a lot of highly acclaimed shows, but they only ran 1 or 2 seasons, and you never see them again because there's not enough there to warrant a syndication package. Now they're seeing them now because now you're coming up on home video. And that was one, you can $20, and they can make money on that way. But they couldn't make any money on a 1 or 2 season show back in the day when it was just syndication. There was no home video. So that one, so the large part of it was like third season was pretty much filling out the numbers. When you get to like 79, 80 episodes, okay, yeah, that's enough there. Strip syndication. Remember, this was, when they start showing the show like back to independent stations, like Channel 2 used to be, or middle of the day when the network's not offering up anything particularly interesting, and in this case, here it was Channel 4, which at the time was an NBC station, ironically enough, and they started running the shows at 4 in the afternoon. And thankfully, when they got them, they were uncut. It was still the full episode. So they didn't have the big cuts for, adding in more commercials. This is the early 70s. They weren't doing that. And they're not like they're pulling that much money anyway at that time of the day. So I saw them as they ran on the network. The only difference is I saw them in production order. because they come out, they send the films out, and they got the production number on the film can. And it's kind of like, we got to show them which one you go for. Well, just go with the first one. And so first one I saw, then we start off was Where No Man's Gone Before, and then moving on to Corbomite Maneuver, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And then, again, those of us who were too young, again, I knew of the show. I apparently liked the show enough, but I hadn't a chance to really. And apparently, as a toddler, I was watching it alongside my dad, who watched it back when it was on network. So I knew of the show. There is not a moment in my life I can say I discovered Star Trek. It's always been there. It's like, when you first hear about Santa Claus or Superman. It's always been there. It's always been a part of my personal mythology. So, and the thing, and first time I consciously able to remember watching this stuff was the animated show. But even then, I knew this wasn't the original. This is a follow-up to that live action show that ran a few years earlier. And so when I saw the first trailers for real live action Star Trek, all right, finally I can start doing the catch-up running. And then for the longest time, Monday through Friday, 4:00, Channel 4, that was Star Trek time. And we were one of those lucky families that got the Arbitron rating books. So guess who was running the rating book? I made a damn point to make sure at 4:00, I even filled it out ahead of time, okay? I made sure that's on there. Might as well way to stick it back to the network. And again, now the kids who were too young to watch it now, but wanted to get caught up on what this thing they knew was back there. Is okay, now we can finally watch it for real and pay attention to it. And again, all the mass markets that was already kicking in, like let's see, original the mass market version of the Concordance came out in like 76 or so. The Enterprise blueprints and the tech manual and all this stuff was kicking in around that time. So it was like kind of a perfect storm of fan experience and of course right on the heels of like the animated series. Which again, people say that's the fourth and fifth. No, it's only the fourth. It's only 22 episodes. Okay, I'm not put it all together. You got a short fourth season, and I prefer to have the fifth season as Star Trek continues, and that's even just 11 episodes. But that is how the path that Star Trek took to getting wild, okay, and the phenomenon really kicking in because now. And I think it was also, part of it was like Shatner said, the part of the allure was the fact that he had a feeling of unfinished business because it had been cut short. The plan was 5 years, 5 seasons, because that comes to, around 100 episodes or so. And that's the perfect number for, at the time for a syndicated show because you can run 5 days a week, most of the year, before you have to repeat yourself. 79 episodes, you're kind of pushing it. But it worked out fine. It was enough. And also helped that the guy in charge of the Kaiser broadcast group was a big fan. He had missed out on getting the syndication deal for Twilight Zone. He was determined to get Star Trek. Because he liked his kids. No, we're going to get Star Trek. So that was part of it right there. And again, they nailed that down mid-second season. But that was where that get in. And things are off in the running. And eventually they start, again, with the animated show in the 70s was kind of a test ground to see how much interest is there in bringing this show back. And it actually won a Creative Emmy, first one in the entire franchise's history. Because that's what awards they had gotten to that point were special, technical awards. I mean, you had, Nimoy was nominated all 3 years for Best Supporting Actor, but he never won. But that was the first one they actually got Best Children's Program. And considering some of the wild stuff they were doing, because the whole point when they told the writers, we're not doing kiddie Trek, we're doing Star Trek in animated form. And the stories a lot of the stories actually were stuff they were held over in case they got a fourth season. Like Bem, More Troubles, More Troubles. Yesteryear, I think, was also in there. There's quite a few that they'd had them on hand, and we'll get to these in the fourth year if we get a fourth year. So they had them around, and also bring it back a lot, because there was a writer's strike on, But like today, back then, animation is under a different union, so they weren't affected by the strike, and they could, while they're walking the picket line, they could write stuff for Star Trek, animated Star Trek, and get a check. And so they got a lot, and that's why you look at the list of writers on there. These are not, the usual guys who are writing, for like the New Adventures of Gilligan's Island, and they're animation. Because Filmation was also cranking out a lot of, animated shows based on live action. They had a Lost in Space show. They had a Gilligan's Island. I think they also were behind the Osmonds and the Jackson 5 cartoons and a few other. But Star Trek did stand out there, and that they weren't doing like, because they did swat back the idea. Oh yeah, we'll have the crew, and then we'll have the younger compartment. They're like little cadets following along. No, we're not doing that. We're going to do this the same way we did the original show. This is the crew and the Enterprise, and they're going and stuff. The closest they did was replace Chekhov with Lieutenant Eric's, and bring in Maress and a couple other in there. And also kudos to Leonard Nimoy and I think Bill Shatner had a hand in it, but they were originally not going to have George Takei and Nichelle Nichols come back. They were going to have Jimmy Doohan and Majel Barrett do all the voices inside thing, or maybe a couple of it. And Nimoy, no, you don't bring back George, you don't get me. Lay down the law. No, we're bringing back that cast. And Walter was a little muffled that he wasn't brought back, but he was given the chance to write an episode. He didn't envisage that the idea of aliens being walking asparagus, but hey, you got paid, Walter. Okay, and it's still an interesting episode. And they get some, again, you get past the 40-foot tall Spock and the thing, and there's some heavy stuff in there. He gets on about how the Federation and all their wars with the Klingons, the Romulans, the Gazenti. The first reference to the Gazenti, I believe, too. They hadn't shown up yet, but they were already in there. They were working on it. But that's pretty much how that went on the early going with the original series. It was like, yeah. And again, the whole thing about the second pilot being a big thing and all that, it wasn't really. By this point especially, second pilots were unusual, because usually it's one, we just make it up one way or the other, but it wasn't unheard of. It wasn't unprecedented by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, at the very same time that they were doing a second pilot for Star Trek, they were also doing a second pilot for a sitcom idea that they were working with NBC about. So it wasn't even unprecedented for Desilu to do a second pilot. They were doing one at the same damn time. So let's just, toss that one out there. No, because even Bob Justin, it was unprecedented. Now it's not. It wasn't unprecedented by any stretch of the imagination. They've been doing it since the 40s. One show went through 5 pilots, and then when it finally got on the air, I think maybe 3 weeks and got canned. So maybe it was based on a hit radio show. Go to facttrek.com. They got it's still their lead story when you click on it about how many how unprecedented it was. Multiple pilots. It wasn't. In fact, very famous example, the Dick Van Dyke Show. That was, their original was Carl Reiner. I think it was called, Head of the House or Head of the Family or something. It's on there, but they go through and they like the concept of it. That's usually the thing where they like the concept, they like the idea behind the show, but they don't like the way it's executed. So they say, let's try this. Let's try another one here. And that's also why when they. For Star Trek's case specifically, they did not want to work with Roddenberry again. So it was a case of well, okay, Herb, but if you're not, we're going to make it jump through a few hoops first. Okay, that's what their thinking is. So they had 3 script submissions, and they picked the one that they figured was the hardest to produce, and that was The Cage. Later, the actual title when they threw it was The Menagerie, but that would have confused folks when they did the 2-parter under the same title. So and since they didn't flash the on the title on screen anyway, they could easily switch back to we'll call this The Cage again. But they picked the hardest one, the most far out one, where because I think one of the scripts submitted was Mudd's Women, as an idea, but that would have essentially been a bottle show. There's very little thing there. So like, no, not they wanted something where you're really pushing the limits. You're creating these aliens, multiple aliens and the planetary set and going all kinds of weird things. Yeah, we'll see if you can do that one. If you can do that one, we'll believe you can do a show for real. So it went on, they did it. And no, it wasn't quite the action adventure Rob and Sockman thing they're looking for, but it was compelling enough that, okay, if he did pull it off for the most part. But if we give him the green light on this, he'll do more of it. So like, no, okay, we'll do it, but you better make the next one more like what you promised, And you got, Bill Shatner in a fist fight with the gods, and that, so it fit the bill. Okay, fine, we'll do the rest of the show. And this is also back in the day when pilots really didn't see air that often. I mean, a failed pilot saw air all the time, as TV movies, these various playhouse things. That was a dumping ground for failed pilots, where they would, well, we got to fill something. Yeah, throw it. This is an hour. So I'm convinced that Where No Man's Gone Before was really not intended to be aired, especially when they did all the changes. I think, slight changes in the cast by that point, but also major changes in the uniform, the model, other things. In fact, the original version of Where No Man's Gone Before has a totally different theme song. When they put that up there, a little more they say, no, we like the first one better. So they went back to what they had for the cage. But that would, I'm pretty sure they only aired that because they were falling behind. They started production like March, and by September they, the effects house, the Howard Anderson Company was Desilu's on-site house. They weren't able to keep up with it. They were falling further and further behind. But at that time, they only had like a handful of episodes that were ready to air. And of the 5, the Man Trap was the only one that really seemed like a decent jumping off point. Because you're being presented with a crew and there's an alien running around killing people, and because again, Mud's Women was in the mix. That's it's mail order brides in space. That didn't seem very compelling. The Enemy Within was one of them. That's like it's a little gruesome. Naked Time was up there, but that one really doesn't work unless you know these characters beforehand, so you can appreciate why Spock is hiding himself in the briefing room, crying his eyes out. Well, what's up? You need to know him better before you really fully appreciate that. Where's Man Trap? Okay, that's good enough. It's also the first one where anybody actually dies too. But normally, if the effects had been done on time, Corbomite Maneuver would have been the first one aired because it was essentially your third pilot. Because you watch it, everybody's given little introduction moments. You learn a lot about it, and it sets up the whole premise very well. This is not go out there and blow away Martians. We're the good guy. Manifest Destiny. No, this was very much going out and meeting new something. Like the line when they're talking about beaming over the little scout ship. Help out Jim. You were thinking, what's the mission of this vessel, Doctor? To seek out and contact alien life and let them chance to demonstrate what our high sounding words mean. It's like that's your right there in a nutshell. Right there, that's your show. And you got everyone else giving nice moments of introduction there. And that would have been the perfect jumping up. And the result and the response, I think, would have been much better if that had been the first episode aired instead of Man Trap. Man Trap was blown away with, this is more cheesy, sci-fi crap, But then again, you eventually get to the point where it's like, Bob Justman's about to send a letter to the network apologizing for not being able to make their air date. And both Herb Solo and Gene Roddenberry say, don't you dare send that letter. We will figure something out. But if you send that letter, we are dead. They will can us in the moment. that is a kind of a death now. Because they plan out through the year. Because I've got a schedule of what the original air dates were. And also when they do reruns throughout the season. So that's one other reason why I complain about going by air date. Well, what about when they repeated this episode 6 weeks later? Are we going to count that somewhere in the chronology? No. Go by production order. And that is where we got, and also, Desi was sitting on this highly expensive first pilot. They wanted do something with it. Have fun, Parrothead. That because they're doing this sitting in a damn film vault. We got to do something. It's going to investment here. Like the thing is, it's totally different from the final product. It's like you got the ship and one guy, And so Rob, I'll figure out something. Okay, and then of course there's all the big growing backlog where we need time to catch up and catch our breath. And it's like, okay. And so, let's see. Usually in situations like that, you do a clip show, which is a little early for a series halfway through its first season. But here we have over about an hour's worth of clips nobody's seen before. So we just need to do the old thing of come up with a framing device to show the clips. And this also, I'm pretty sure, was network television's first and only 2-part clip show. Helped by the fact that it's clips nobody's seen before. And so when they did, it took like 4 days to film the surrounding bits on Starbase and on the court martial on the ship. Normally, a typical episode of Star Trek took at least 6 days, sometimes 7, sometimes 8. You're doing pickups between other episodes. This one gave them it gave everybody time to sit back and breathe. Gave everyone else, the production, the post-production people, time to catch up and get these effects done. And they were never behind again, at least not to that degree. I mean, there was still a lot of, the episode that ran was just completed that week. There was a lot of that, especially, because if you look at like first season especially, it's like the episodes towards the end there, that's their production order. They were kicking them and sending them off. You're lucky they were edited. But yeah, they finally got their acts together. They also, I think, started bringing in other effects houses to catch up some of the slack too. Because that's like Howard Anderson just was not capable of doing this stuff at the time, And they had to bring in like Vanderveer and effects, Hollywood effect. Okay, that's good. All right. But yeah, this if you're interested in TV production, especially back in the day, but I think certain lessons hold over. Get a copy of Making a Star Trek if you can track it down. There, God knows, millions of copies are put out there. I mean, doesn't that be first? My first copy in the 70s was like 17th printing. So you might even find one on the shelf at the Barnes & Noble, but just go out and you can find them for cheap probably. And that goes to, the whole thing of producing a show and the kind of headaches you've got to deal with. And some of the stuff you do, if you're dealing with a network, some of the idiocy you got to deal with them. But yeah, we're at half an hour. That's enough here. So I will bring up the proper ending thing here. So we will talk at you later.